looking up, they're only seeing half the Renaissance Fair because we are quiet about it a little bit because this is a village. Among Ren Fair, the booth owners, there's a lot of layers of Ren Fair. There's the kids that are working the food booths. This is like working at Six Flags for the weekend. There's the actors and actresses who are great people, and they have their own community within their acting community. But then there's those of us who are the boothies, who work in the shops. In the early days, we were the only ones who called ourselves Rennies. And if you don't look up, you don't see all the living quarters. This is a village. Crownsville's population grows by a few hundred every year. People live in their booths. We have back rooms. Some of the booths have full apartments above them. And this is how we make our living. So when one of us gets hurt, that's when we see the most of our community. Several years ago, one of our dear friends here at this fair was wounded in a car accident. He had a shop in New Orleans. He was a 70-year-old man, and he was struck by a dump truck as he was pulling out of the parking lot of the Ren Fair. We threw monster support for him. We took one of the pubs and the management of the fair threw a fundraising for him, and we threw a big thing for him. So that's where it comes out. We all know each other. We get together and have dinner during the week, those of us who stay here during the week and live on the fair site. And I know people have raised their children at Ren Fairs. There's Ren Fairs in the southern circuit. The fairs are organized in what's called circuits. The southern circuit is Texas, Houston Fair, which is TRF. TRF has its own Rennie subdivision. There's a section of land next to the Ren Fair called Toontown. And it's a chunk of land that the owner of the Ren Fair bought, subdivided, and sold lots off to Rennies. And it's called Toontown. It's a Ren Fair subdivision. Scarborough Fair, my home fair, has a school in the backside of the fair because there are so many children on Southern Circuit that they got together and built a school out of the leftover parts of booths. And the kids who are on circuit all the time go there and take Rennie school during the weekends. They run around with a teacher and do studies and courses, and they learn a lot of history.
Excellent. And so I think I really only have one last.
I have some questions afterwards.
Question. When you think of the notion of community in the Renaissance Fair or the Renaissance Festival, how does that strike you as? I mean, how different is that in your mind from what might be called, forgive me, the normal world?
Well, that's all right. You know what? We work in the fine arts field too. I've done fine art shows. My wife and I both come from working class community backgrounds, families. And I worked in the trades for a long time. When I wasn't working Ren Fairs, I paid my living by building houses and such. The community is the same wherever you go. People come together and help one another. Community is intuitive to human nature, and it's not that different. It's incredibly accepting at the Ren Fair. That's one thing. Invariably, a lot of the people associated with Ren Fairs, to coin a phrase, are geeks. We were science fiction fans, we were history fans, we were fantasy fans, we played with computers, we played with technology, we played with art, and a lot of us who work and participate in the fairs were not, the popular kids in school. The fun thing is it's a geek world now. Everybody plays with computers. Everybody watches fantasy movies. Fantasy movies are the biggest thing in Hollywood today. It's a geek world, and it's a fun time to be a geek in a world like this. People like us. The Ren Fairs are exploding in growth. They do well every year, even with a tough economy. Maryland Renaissance Fair is the best festival in the country. I only do this Ren Fair anymore because we do this, and we do a number of what are called fairy festivals, which is a new style of putting on a festival. It's all fantasy. We don't have to travel and do Ren Fairs. I traveled for a lot of years during the Renaissance festivals.
Go ahead, Lauren, shoot.
Okay, first of all, you just got me completely intrigued about that whole fairy thing, and where can I find one?
Well, actually, here, Matt.
Oh, if there's I can get that out.
Give this lady one. So what's your question?
You just said that there's now an offshoot of the Renaissance Festival, the fairy fairs. Can you tell me more about that?
You could call them an offshoot of the Renaissance Fair. The fairy festivals have grown out of an interest in fantasy. You know, if you look back into the 70s, with my generation, there's a very great mythologist, Joseph Campbell. He wrote a book a long time ago called A Hero with a Thousand Faces, talked about the hero's journey. He wrote this back in the 40s. That book has gone through a lot of phases. A lot of people have read it. One guy who read that a lot of years ago is a guy named George Lucas. And George Lucas read this story about a hero's journey, and he made a movie that changed a whole generation. A whole generation looked at fantasy differently. A whole generation looked at stories differently. And a whole generation grew up going to Renaissance fairs. I'm 37. I was, you know, a kid when Star Wars came out, and it affected my whole life. Now, there's a whole industry around this. And long term, you know, when we were kids, there was the movie Legend that came out. There was the movie Labyrinth that came out with David Bowie and Brian Froud. That art influenced a whole generation of people and ultimately has created a larger scene. Now there are fairy festivals. The longest running one is the Spoutwood Farm May Day Fairy Festival. Always happens the first weekend in May. It's a small organic farm in Glen Rock, Pennsylvania. And they put up an event and put up a maypole, had some kids come out, dress up like fairies. But then they started attracting the fairy fans. And then the art came in and the people came in. And ultimately, when you look at what's going on in culture, you have Alan Lee, the conceptual artist behind Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is one of the biggest movies ever made in Hollywood, period. It goes back to the great days of the Hollywood classics. So 50 years ago, we made Cleopatra and John Wayne movies. Now we make Lord of the Rings, Spiderwick, the Narnia series. And I work with a magazine that talks about all the fairy festivals, Fairy Magazine. I'm a contributing editor. My wife and I work with the main editor, and it's a magazine about the art and what's often called within the community of people who do it, the mythic arts.
Now, going back to your involvement in, just a little bit closer here, fix my ears, with the Ren Fair, you know, your son is 16?
16?
16. How long has he been involved in this, and is this something where, you know, he's involved in it? If you could just kind of look a little closer into the
Sure.
camera. You know, is this his life? You know, you got involved in it when you were 10. You know,
Right.
What is it like to be involved in a Ren Fair your entire life and have this be the norm? You know, whereas for so many people, it's not the norm. It's their
Right,
escape from
absolutely.
the norm.
And I recognize that. As a matter of fact, that's what people are out here shopping for too. They're not just buying a mask, they're buying a little slice of our lifestyle. When people come into my shop and they say, oh, you people are so creative, they mean that because they don't have a creative outlet in their lives. You know, my creative outlet is my art. I make masks all day long. It's a real struggle. We have a family of 4. We have a 5-year-old, a 16-year-old, my wife and I, and a mortgage, just like everybody else. We're homeschooling both of our children. We homeschool our children because 19 weekends out of the year, or 9 weekends out of the year here, and other weekends out of the year, we have to pack everything up and run to a Ren Fair. So he's forced to be homeschooled. He enjoys that. He likes being homeschooled. He's very, very smart. He's kind of a geek too. He's interested in sci-fi. However, he does not want to be a Renaissance fair craftsman, and I don't blame him for that. It is often borders between fine art and light industry. And many times during the week, we make hundreds of pieces a week. And we cut leather until our hands are numb, and we paint till 2 o'clock in the morning, and we work 12, 15-hour days. It's very, very, very hard work. And so he's interested in being a writer. I've seen a lot of kids grow up at Ren Fairs, and I was joking with a friend of mine, when you grow up in a booth, you ultimately become a stage act. Because I've seen a number of kids grow up around booths, and the booth workers were working very hard producing a craft during the week, and they say, oh, I could do that, and I like Ren Fairs, but I could go get on stage and I could perform and only work on the weekends. So, and in that aspect, this is the last great vaudevillian experience in the country. So vaudeville is this is all really that's left. You can go to Las Vegas, you can perform on stage. At a Renaissance fair, you can see a juggler, you can see a comedy act, you can see a musical act. This is vaudeville, and a lot of vaudevillians start here. A lot of them, we were talking about it earlier, don't like to admit it. Penn and Teller started at the Renaissance fair, and I believe they performed at this Ren Fair when it was located in Columbia.
So, is it a good life